Chapter 10. By mid-May, new developments were seen on all fronts. Some were good and some were bad. Daniel failed at every attempt at getting any answers as to why the Sub-Zero project had been shelved and was unable to get a hearing before the full National Science Board. Tony and the gang were absolutely certain that General Lowe was in cahoots with some sort of shadowy group, but they could find no proof. Daniel was very depressed about the whole affair. Although he wasn't hurt so much by the program ending, it was that his honour had been maligned with the charges of misappropriating funds, and then there was his father. He so desperately wanted to patch things up with Pop, but there was no hope of that until his dad was willing to listen to him, and more importantly, believe him. Without that, Daniel knew the two of them would never reconnect. Still, he had his class, and he and Kelly kept presenting their hurricane show. That much was still very popular, and she had said to meet him here to learn something very important about it. "Daniel, over here," came the voice. He turned and saw her. "Hey, Kelly, what's the big news you got me over here for?" She laughed. "Well, you're sure you don't bother with small talk, do you?" "Sorry, but I got another invite today." "Oh, what, is Jessica wanting to meet today to look at rings?" Now it was his turn to laugh. "No, not yet. The little monster is still intent on marriage, but she's lightened up since Anne is expecting her new baby sister in a month." "Ah, yes, I do remember Greg mentioning that at the last theatre meeting." "So, okay, what's the big news?" Daniel said. Kelly mimed playing the drums. "Drum roll, please. The state of Florida wants us to take our show on the road, so to speak." "Okay, and that would mean they'd like us to put the hurricane show on at schools across the state," Kelly said. "Wow, but that's a lot of schools. How are we supposed to cover so many? Even at the rate of one a day, it'd take us over a year to visit all of them." "Ah, that's where the next bit of news comes in. The state wants us to train some other teams to do the show." "Whoa, so we're going to need to do a casting call and get more props and supplies," Daniel said. "What about the money to pay for all this?" Kelly nodded. "Yeah, they've given us a budget too, so when do you want to get started?" "Boy, this is all a lot to take in. Wait a minute, do they know I'm part of the deal?" "Huh? Why would that matter?" "Kelly, you're the one who's always going on about the conspiracy theories." She pointed at him very sternly. "Hey, I'm still convinced I'm right about that." Daniel raised his hands as if to surrender. "Easy there, lady, don't point that thing at me, it might go off." "Oh, sorry," she said, lowering her hand. "So what's the problem?" "Well, what if the whole problem with my dad comes to light? I mean, you know how tabloid newspapers are. They'd just love to plaster a story like that all over the place," Daniel said. Kelly slowly nodded. "I see what you mean, but honestly, I don't think it'll be a problem." "Okay, so as long as you're sure," Daniel said. "Now I must be off." "And so must I. Now what about us meeting up to outline the program?" Daniel started walking toward the theatre department and Kelly walked with him. Let me think. How about this Saturday? Gabby wants to help John with a new show and we can use her place. Why not yours? "Kelly, you've seen my apartment. It's very small for us to do that. Gabby's new place is down near Charlotte Harbour and nice and big." They reached the theatre and Kelly pulled the door open. She looked at him totally confused and he looked her up and down. Daniel, are you going to the theatre too? This is my stop." He nodded. "Yeah, Tony asked me to come by. Why are you here?" I decided to try out for the show," Kelly said, her face getting just a bit red. Daniel grinned. "You're going to try out for Kiss Me Kate? I didn't think you cared for the theatre." "Well, with all we're doing with our show, I figured getting some acting experience would help. Besides, getting a small part in a show just sounds like fun, don't you think?" Daniel shrugged. To each or her own. I'm just not into that sort of thing." They moved into the lobby area and looked around. The lobby was as magnificent as the building was plain. Thick, rich carpeting with a fancy paisley pattern, plush seats clustered around low oval coffee tables and a marble top counter across the glass doors. It looked for all the world like a real theatre lobby. "Dr. Lund likes to keep things as realistic as possible around here," Kelly said. "He says it will help the students relate to the real world once they're out and trying to break into show business." Yeah, right, like that's ever going to happen. Daniel stepped over to a collection of cast photos from previous years mounted on a wall to the left. He recognised shows like Little Shop of Horrors, King Lear, Babes in Arms and Romeo and Juliet. "You make it sound like none of the students are ever going to go into the theatre." Kelly laughed. "Oh, it's not that. It's just that I know how tough that business is. Without some good connections, it's not likely any of them will ever have a shot at getting their foot in the door." "Oh, I see what you mean," Daniel said. "Yeah, that's right. My pop would say exactly the same thing if I wanted to get into acting. He didn't approve of the theatre. Says it's frivolous and unproductive. Sounds like he and my parents would get along perfectly. I got the lead in a high school show and they couldn't have cared less. Wouldn't even come to see me. Even if they weren't interested in the show, you'd have thought they'd at least make the effort for my sake," Kelly said. "Yeah, what are you going to do? You can't force them, can you?" True, you're very wise, Daniel, for someone who can be quite the geek sometimes, Kelly said with a laugh. Daniel's eyes darted back and forth. He guessed that was some sort of compliment. Ah, okay. Gee, it's too bad your parents blew it off. You sure they weren't busy? Kelly smiled. Never mind. Come on, I'll show you the main theatre. It's a pretty awesome place. On both sides of the collection of pictures were double doors, and Kelly led Daniel through one of them and into the main theatre. She was right, it was an incredible place, a large U-shaped seating area that wrapped around a thrust stage. The stage area seemed to be at the bottom of a deep pit as the seats steeply sloped down to it. Above them was an intricate series of catwalks that connected to all of the lighting. Wow, that's something, Daniel said as he tilted his head back and looked up. Yeah, the catwalk was designed and built in England and they shipped over here and put us back together, Kelly said. They say it was a perfect fit. The stage was empty, but stained with the paint of previous shows. Daniel smiled. He'd seen that before. It had been years, but he remembered working on shows often enough back home with his dad, but he'd never worked on a stage that didn't have a curtain. This was going to be a new experience, and he was looking forward to it. John Lund and Tony came out from the backstage area and waved to the two of them. Kelly, you made it, John said. Good to see you, Daniel. Are you trying out? He shook his head. Oh, no, Tony asked me to come by. He's working backstage and wants me to help out. John slowly nodded. Ah, I see. You sure? I mean, I think you've got some real talent. You could easily handle one of Bianca's suitors. Nope, not for me. Thanks anyway. Kelly stepped closer to John. So when do we start the auditions? Why aren't you the eager beaver? John said with a laugh. You're early, milady. We're just waiting for the others to show up and then we'll get started. He pulled a piece of paper off his clipboard and held it out to her. Here, go ahead and fill this out. Kelly did so, and Daniel sat down with Tony to review the props and set pieces they expected to have for the show. A few hours later, the gang, Tony, Kelly and Daniel, were once again gathered around a table at Chili's. The guys raised their glasses. A toast, Daniel said. To our new leading lady, Tony added. Miss Kelly Delaney. She blushed and lowered her eyes. Oh, come on, guys, you're embarrassing me. It's nothing. Tony took a long swig from his drink and then set his glass down with a bang. Are you kidding me? Nothing. Kelly, do you know how rare it is for a non-theatre student to get a leading role? Come on, this is truly a cause for major celebration. Daniel nodded. I agree. Kelly, you got to tell your family about this. I'm sure they'll want to come see you this time. I guess I could. Hey, she shouted and pointed at the television. Hey, turn that up. Daniel turned his head to look at where she was pointing. A weather bulletin was coming on, but they couldn't hear a thing. Kelly didn't wait for the waitress to respond. She got up and raced to the remote and cranked up the volume. Daniel and Tony joined her and they listened to the report. Kelly's jaw dropped. I don't believe it. It can't be, Daniel said. Tony slowly shook his head. I don't get it. I thought hurricane season didn't start until June. It doesn't. It shouldn't, Kelly snapped. This is impossible. Hurricane Alex is heading for Jamaica and he's a Category 2. This is beyond belief. Daniel chewed his lip. Is there anything we should do? I've got to get into the office as soon as possible, Kelly replied. I'll need to get all the data on the storm and run it through the computer model. A storm this early could be a sign of an incredibly active season. I guess that means our celebration has to be put on hold, right? Tony said. The other two slowly and sadly nodded. Daniel felt a very cold, wet sensation creep through his body as he broke out in goosebumps. For some reason, he sensed that something bad was coming. Ah, gentlemen, this is such good news, General Lowe said, his tone happy. The 13 of them sat in their conference room, a huge flat-screen TV on, and showing footage of the storm. Croesus grinned, showing off his dazzling capped teeth, even in the dimly lit room. Yes, it would appear this year is going to be quite profitable. Now, you're quite sure this Mayhew person is out of the way? We want nothing to interfere with our latest plans. Stefano laughed. What? That fool? He's nothing. What of his associates? Red said. That Delaney woman has been searching the internet for information on us. Stefano rolled his eyes. Oh, please, all she's going to find is a bunch of conspiracy theory junk. She is a complete non-issue. I would hope so, General, Croesus said, because we have a new endeavor this year which promises substantial income for us, provided the hurricane season is as active as we suspect. Oh, what's that? Stefano said. Croesus gestured at Blue, who pointed a remote at the TV. A click, and a profile of the stocks for the major US oil companies appeared on the screen. Blue got to his feet and moved to stand next to the screen. This is the state of the US oil industry. General Lowe slowly nodded. Seems quite healthy right now. Yes, this is exactly what we want, Blue said. We want to sell. We want to sell. We want to sell short on all these stocks. Ah, you have to forgive an old soldier, but I'm not familiar with stock terms. What exactly are you talking about? It's quite simple, General, Blue said. We're selling shares in all of these companies that we don't own yet. How is that a good thing? Won't you have to come up with those shares at some point? Blue nodded. Exactly. We have a delivery date set for later this year during the height of the hurricane season. You get the point, General? Croesus said. Stefano slowly nodded. Yes, I do. Ah, an excellent plan. We sell when the stock prices are high, then buy them low once they drop following the hurricanes. Yes, Blue said. So you can understand our concerns about anything that would threaten our plans. Mr. Mayhew's plan must not be implemented. Gentlemen, how many times must I tell you? Daniel Mayhew is no threat to us, General Lowe said. You have said that, Croesus said. However, my man Smith reported that the submarines still have the Sub-Zero equipment on them. If pressed back into service, they could be made operational. Why is that, General Lowe? Why were they not disassembled? Stefano rolled his eyes. Croesus, gentlemen, relax. The subs have returned to their normal duties. Now, yes, the equipment is still in place, but that's to be expected. The cost to remove it would be prohibitive. This is unless some of you could care to foot the bill. Croesus laughed, and the other immediately laughed with him and stopped the instant he did. We are in the business of making money, General, not spending it, he said. Now to the matter at hand. The Sub-Zero program you certainly cannot be revived in the future, he then asked. Brought back, Stefano said. Now that I cannot say with certainty. However, I assure you we have nothing to fear from it. Mr. Mayhew has been completely discredited. Croesus sat forward in his chair. I find that less than reassuring, General. What about arranging a few accidents for the submarines? Blue suggested. Now it was the General's turn to sit bolt upright. He might be concerned with making money so much that he'd do things that weren't good for his country, but now they were talking about endangering military personnel. No matter what he might be, General Lowe was forever loyal to his fellow servicemen and women. Stefano ground his teeth and slowly stood up. Gentlemen, no such acts are to be considered. The room fell silent. He slowly nodded. He'd made his point. Normally it fell to Croesus to make such firm statements. He sat back in his chair. The General is right. Such actions are unnecessary. Stefano gave him a little nod. Thank you, sir, for understanding. After all, the loss of so many ships would raise suspicions, and we don't want that, do we? Leave it to me. I'll ensure Sub-Zero is never a threat to us. Will that do? So be it, General, Croesus said. The matter is entirely on your head. Stefano ground his teeth again. While he'd said there was nothing to worry about, there was one thing troubling him. He was a man who relished power and control, yet here was a case where he could not be certain that he had power over the situation. There were too many variables to know for sure. He needed some insurance. He had a complete file on Daniel, so there had to be a weakness to the man. Every person has a soft spot, an Achilles heel, some place where they were vulnerable. You find that point and squeeze, and then they would bend to your will, so the General would find Daniel's. A week later, Kelly sat in her office and pored over the latest results of her hurricane computer model. She was not happy, and it had to be evident from her face. Heidi was standing in the doorway, and she looked very worried. Okay, Kelly, come on, what's the word? I know it's bad, but just how bad? I've run the calculation 4 times, and the results are the same every time. This early storm is a sign of very bad things to come. Heidi held up a pile of papers. Kelly recognized them as her previous report. So you're saying we'll have more than 20 named storms and more than 6 major ones? Heidi said. If this model holds, we're looking at breaking the record for most storms, and we will hit a Category 6. Kelly replied. Heidi paced about the room, clearly lost in thought. Kelly wanted to speak, to say something encouraging, but she had no words to offer. Finally, Heidi stopped and turned to her. All right, print out the full report this time and give me a dozen copies. Kelly's eyebrows went up. Sure, Heidi, but why so many? I'm flying to Washington tomorrow for a meeting of the National Weather Bureau. I'm going to present your report to them, the entire report. Kelly couldn't help but just jump to her feet and cheer. Yee-haw! Oh, sorry, I guess I shouldn't be happy about that. It's okay, Kelly. The case was but keep in mind, just because I'm going to present your report to them doesn't mean they're going to accept it. No, I understand. Maybe I should go along? I could do my PowerPoint presentation to help. No, Heidi snapped. Then she calmed down. Sorry, I didn't mean to snap at you like that. It's just, well, you can be a bit too forceful in your presentation, Kelly. You need to learn to be more diplomatic. Kelly slowly nodded. Yeah, okay, I get it. I don't know how to be delicate, right? Exactly. When dealing with politicians, you have to know how to schmooze them, Heidi said. With you, you're obnoxious and disliked. Yeah, I know, but this is a scientific report. Why should they reject it when I'm the one they hate? Kelly said. Well, it all comes down to a case of guilt by association. They see you, they hear you speak about your theory, and in their eyes the two are one and the same, Heidi explained. Okay, Mother dear, I'll stay home while you go visit the relations, Kelly said. Here. There, how's that sound? Heidi laughed and Kelly joined her. Talk like that to the powers that be and they'll toss you out for being too condescending, Heidi said. Like I said, leave it to me. Kelly nodded and changed the view on her first computer screen. She brought up the latest weather report. Heidi stepped up behind her and they watched the video streaming from Jamaica. Heidi, I've got to tell you, this scares me worse than anything I've ever dealt with, Kelly said. I can understand why, Heidi replied. Kelly did a double take. Really? Of course, your computer models are theoretical. This, she said, pointing at the screen, is reality. Kind of makes you long for the glamour of the stage, doesn't it? Oh, somebody squealed, Kelly said in surprise. Who is it? I'm going to shave their head. Heidi laughed, long and loud. This time Kelly remained quiet and stoic. It took a few minutes, but Heidi finally calmed down enough to talk. She wiped a tear of joy from her cheek and smiled at Kelly. Now, don't do anything rash. After all, the dear gentleman was just happy for you. Kelly slowly rose to her feet. A guy, huh? So it was Daniel or Tony? Oh, all right, it was Daniel. Now come on, Kelly, cut him some slack. He was very excited about you getting the lead. He was like a little kid opening presents on Christmas morning. Yeah, that's Daniel. God, what an overgrown kid he is, Kelly said, sitting down. Once the report was ready, Kelly sent it to the printer copier, and they got them all put together. As Heidi had a plane to catch, she took off early. As for Kelly, she stayed glued to her desk and watched the news and data about the storm continuing to come in. She sat there long after 5 o'clock, poring over every bit of information she could get from any source. Deep in the pit of her stomach, she had a bad feeling about this. It was funny. She couldn't help but think of her father's rants about the end of times. And there was something else. In amongst all the data on storms and damage and talk of how busy a hurricane season it was going to be, there was a little blurb about an ancient Mayan prophecy. Kelly spent a few minutes reading through it and then did an in-depth search online for more information. It seemed 2012, according to the Mayans, was also the period of the end of times. But there was considerable debate as to what that really meant. Was it the end of the world, or merely the end of one era and the dawn of a new age? Finally, in total frustration, she switched off her computer and left for the evening. No, it was all pure silliness. She'd head out for a bite to eat and then go over to the college for the evening's rehearsal.